That's a lovely start for everyone there, me coughing. And we're live, by the way.
Okay. Welcome everyone to Matchup Plus Plus, which is the show that is here to prepare you for the meta factions and non-meta factions in the game, what they're running, what you need to prepare for. Have you ever watched any podcast, our podcast, about and then you hear Chris say, I've got to prepare for the Chaos Space Marine matchup, but you don't know what that is because there's no Chaos Space Marines local to you. Well, that's what this show's going to answer that question for you. So I'm joined this week. I'm going to potentially be a rotating guest, but this week I'm joined by Tom.
Hello.
And Chris.
Yo.
To bring their expertise on
yeah.
the three factions we're talking about this week, which is Chaos Space Marines, Aeldari, and Leagues of Votann. So the way this is going to work is we're going to talk about sort of the general where they are in the meta, units you got to watch out for, and then an example list that's done well recently. And then maybe some tips to cover them. This video is going to be fairly tight, not hilarious, like comically long. Not going to go into the weeds with it, but I guess we can get started with it.
Sweet.
So the first one up we've got is Chaos Space Marines. So as we can see here, they've got a really good performance against Custodes, Space Marines, and Imperial Knights.
Oh, yum.
But their weakest matchups are versus Dark Angels, Gene Stealer Cults. I just put Gene Stealer there, I don't know why. And Orcs. They've got 4 event wins. This is only since the data slates come out, so 4 event wins in a couple of weeks is still pretty impressive. 6% play rate and a 55% overall win rate. Guys, what do you think about the perform best and perform worst against? Does that feel like pretty accurate to you?
I'll let you go first, Chris.
I mean, now that Custodians aren't as strong, I can imagine, then they and Chaos Space Marines like to punch. I think that's you can see kind of like why that would happen. Imperial Knights, I guess Forge Fiends and stuff are nice into that. And Space Marines are pretty crap. So, I think those armies in some ways are all kind of trying to do things that the Chaos Space Marines are doing, but not as well.
Yes.
So therefore, the Chaos are just going to win that game.
Yeah, and CSM have very good damage 3+ weapons. Lots of shooting that can pick up Custodes bodies, Marine bodies, Dev wounds for going through Imperial Knights, and obviously they win straight up shootouts because they can control it with the Nurgle strat quite a lot of the time. So yeah, these are all just very nice profiles for the damage that they put out, and I think the CSM book has better ways of hitting and reaching you and stopping you hitting and reaching them than I would say those books have. Custodes, they're going to have to shoot them, right? They still don't want to hang with them in combat, but I can see why Forge Fiends would just do a number on a brick of Custodes.
I think it's super interesting that Space Marines have such a bad win rate against Chaos Space Marines, but Dark Angels specifically have a really good win rate.
It's
pretty much Deathwing Knights that are making the difference there.
And
right?
I think also the fact that I think a lot of top players have run Dark Angels if they're running Space Marines, right? You haven't seen many people innovating on Space Marines pure. I think you will now, but I don't think you have. I think Dark Angels since WTC have been what people have been clustered around. So if you're playing Dark Angels, you've been more likely to be playing a top player like Paul James or Scrivo. And I think, Deathwing Knights are a massive problem for them because CSM lists, and we'll get to this in a bit, but the melee brawlers they bring are usually good for bullying stuff. Abaddon's obviously an exception, but not that many lists at the moment as heavy on Abaddon. But Chosen, Warp Talons, those kinds of things are great at just smashing through mid-range units, but if they hit a proper heavy combat brawler, they probably come off worst in that fight, which is interesting with the GSC one, because obviously Aberrants, I think it's a similar sort of thing where there can be a big combat brick out there that actually, 5 Chosen or 5 Warp Talons are just going to go in and die. And again, with GSC, they can do the same sorts of things back to CSM. They can screen with the no 12 away shooting. But I think the key thing for GSC is they can drop in 3 away, which is massive in this matchup because so much of the CSM game depends on lone ops for screening, depends on the Nurgle strat for making you untargetable, and GSC can just drop in 3 away and throw a million bombs. And CSM don't have anything that's going to survive that if it does land and get an angle on them.
you think it's the number of bodies as well?
Yeah, I think so. Especially now, dev wounds have changed because it used to be a Forge Fiend would kill like 20 neophytes, right? But it's not. It's not going to do that now in quite the same way. I found it a tough matchup when I played it before, but I'd be interested. I wonder again if the way that CSM lists are currently shaping is maybe a little bit more Gene Stealer cult friendly. But actually, I don't know. I don't know how much this match has been played at the moment. GSC are obviously a bit less common now. It would be interesting to play it right now into like the Liam VSL style list. Orcs is an interesting one. Is that just sheer pressure and screening, you think?
I reckon so. It must, because there are quite a lot of things like the drop, right?
Yeah.
For
A blitz to really use them, you want them to deep strike.
So then if Orcs are just covering all of that board and controlling the angles and where they can kind of land, then I guess what you got
Sorry,
the
Jack,
armor, the AP doesn't really matter that much with the Orcs. They're only AP one. It's not like they're going into a load of Terminators and stuff, and they're trying to punch you, so the Nurgle strat's not as helpful.
I guess it's difficult to choose a target for the Chosen as well, right? Because if you draft the Chosen into like 10 boys, you're just going to get whacked by knobs or something, right?
Yeah, and Orcs have fight on death as well, so no one wins in those fights. And I think the trucks give CSM a bit of an activation problem. We'll talk about this in a bit, but CSM love it when they can have one turn deleting all your hard targets without coming out and then come out and clean up. And obviously Orcs go, here's 8 trucks, and Obliterators can't open 8 trucks whilst hiding behind a wall, so then they're in the danger zone after that, I think.
All right, so the next slide. So the CSM most wanted. So these are the units that are the most probably popular, I would say. Yeah. Most likely, things you've got to watch out for the most. So the first one up is, of course, Forge Fiends. The output is pretty horrific. You look at that weapon on the stat line, it just says D3 shots. You're like, well, that's not so bad. But they actually have 3 of those. So it's 3 and they each have blast. So if you have like 20 guys in your unit, that's actually 3d3 plus 12 shots.
It's a lot of shots. Yeah, it still nearly kills 20 neophytes now. Let's not piss about.
And obviously there's devastating wounds on it for if you want to take a hazardous test, that's fine. So you normally see them either with Undivided or Nurgle. Undivided gives you critical 5 sustain hits. So if you need even more hits on all those shots. And then the other one is Profane Zeal for full real hits and wounds. You normally come in from reserve, do that, and delete something real nasty.
And you usually see like one of each, don't you? At the moment, that seems to be very popular to have one on the board that's Nurgle, so your opponent can't shoot it, and it just threatens the lanes. And then the really high damage one sneaking in. And if you're incredibly patient like Liam VSL, you wait till turn 3 before it comes in. That was the remarkable thing in the final. He waited that long, and then by that point, the Elves were like, there is no way we can stop this coming in somewhere horrible and just having it wreck our dreams. So yeah, they're really, really scary. They don't love T12. They're a bit swinging into T12. Obviously, the Undivided one's pretty good, but you're really fishing for your 6s at that point, trying to get your dev wounds through the target. And they don't love AP reduction in cover as well. That can blunt them. So they have profiles they don't like. Land Raiders can be a bit of a faff. Land Forts can be a bit of a faff, but they're just an all-star. They just can really hurt pretty much anything that they look at. And elite infantry just melt.
That devastating wounds really just smooths out any cracks you would have.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, exactly. Just such consistent damage. And they're long range. That's the other thing. It's like 36-inch range. So they can just cover huge chunks of the board without being in that kind of danger zone where the opponent might get within 12 and you won't be able to protect it. So they're a super, super good unit. They're biggest threats to themselves. From taking mortals from hazardous and dark packs. That's usually how they get hurt. They steadily die over the game.
Right, so next up is Obliterators. Let's say they deep strike in. Once again, the same similar kind of combo. Sustain hits 5-fold with Nurgles or real hits and wounds Undivided. Once per game indirect, and they have a multiple selection of weapons. The most important one is probably the Melter equivalent. Probably the best metal weapon in the game, I would say, combining its range, strength, and damage, because it's not a D6, it's just a 4 that goes up to 6. So what do you think about that one, Chris? Have you played against Obliterators before?
I have, and they dropped in, and I was like, haha, I'm phantasming my Wraith Knight to safety, and then he went, oh, well, I can fire indirect, and by the way, because you're within 12, I'm doing 6 damage a pop. I was like, holy shit. So, I mean, that was a lesson in learning what your opponent could do before you play the game. But actually, yeah, they are pretty terrifying. And because they've got the multi-shot profiles, haven't they? So
Yeah.
actually, they're just good into so many targets. And kind of, you can see why people, was it a WTC, were running like 12?
Yeah.
Because like you come in, you blast away with the indirect, you just clear away the stuff that threatens your obliterators, and then they get to move out and safely and just start shooting all the things you can see. And it's a really nice like 1-2 combo with them.
Yeah, completely. It used to be the issue with obliterators they've always had. They want to make them this enormous like death ball unit, but also they tended to die like once they've come down and shot, right? So in editions past, they gave them shoot twice via a strat, which used to really ruin people's lives. Like I don't think I think I saw more people tilting over double shooting obliterators than anything else in my early 40k days. People would just lose their minds about it, and they've kind of solved that with this indirect thing, which I think is quite an elegant solution, right? So they'll come in, they'll do one really nasty wave. And then waltz out. They're actually quite good in combat, is worth saying as well. Like they fight pretty well. They'll go through light infantry and small targets. Obviously, you can get rerolls on them. And I agree with you. I think it's the Nicholas William goes in the chat and he says, "A blitz are rubbish. Points drops, please." There will be no points drops for you, Nick. You bad man. It's a devastating melter weapon because obviously so many melter now have to get within 9 to do their good stuff, whereas this can drop and get the good stuff on the same turn. And
that's the key.
That's huge. Absolutely huge. And you can try and screen it, but even then they could rapid ingress and walk forward a little bit and then get inside your screen and still do it. So it is very, very scary.
I mean, it helps that because they're also solid in combat, they do stuff in every phase, right?
Yeah.
So they can drop in, they can shoot one unit and then charge another unit, and you're just constantly getting value for them. They're very efficient in that way.
They're slow, but they're punchy enough that you want to just waddle up and make charges. And they once they get onto a point late game, very armored, very tough, lots of wounds. If the opponent's already been hit hard, and that's what this list likes to do, right? Just punches your opponent really hard in the mouth, kills the things that are going to hurt them back, and then cleans up.
All right, and the last one you've got to keep an eye out for is Chosen in a Rhino. That is the new,
so angry.
the new tech that's come out. Has started being popularly used. Chosen do come with advance and charge base, so they can charge something 27 inches away from their transport.
Yeah.
They have a Chaos Lord in there for free armor of contempt equivalent. I can't remember, it's like Deadly Bite or something.
That's right.
All Profane Zeal, so feel real to hit and wound because they are almost every time they're going to be undivided, and their Rhino will be Nurgle, so you can't shoot that. I mean, it's just as you say, good for bullying because they're like Strength 5, AP 2, I think, something like that.
Yeah.
Potentially full reels to hit and wound, exploding 6s to hit. It's just really mean.
The Lord is a little murderer in there as well, right? The Lord with the dev wounds on his hammer, re-rolling hits and wounds is extremely dangerous.
Yeah.
And as you say, the strat support is free, essentially, so they're cheap. The Rhino, as you know, you've got here, the Nurgle marking the Rhino just means either the opponent's got to run straight into Chaos Space Marines, which isn't historically something people like to do, or you're just not going to pick it up. People you tend to use the Rhino does actions a lot of the time, right? They'll park it in the middle, it'll do like homers or something, and so it ends up being quite useful for 75 points.
And what do you do about that Rhino, right? If it starts into an L, what do you do, right? You can't it.
You can't dig it out. You've got enough problems as it is, typically.
It's not high on the price.
It's like trying to open a cheap tank doesn't feel like a great use of my time.
Well, if you go over there and you do get them out, then what? You get charged.
Yeah. And these current boards, like they made it a bit more of a brawl, right? The objectives in the middle are all a bit closer, and there's nothing these can't hit really. If it gets a little bit towards the middle of the board, it can hit your backfield objective. Chosen can reach anything. I've seen people run it with the Master of Possession for +1 advance and charge to get even more reach, which is quite cool. But obviously the output on the Lord is just so good that I think people like the killing. And I think 10 bricks of these are starting to become more popular, and that's really scary because it hits like an old Drakari unit from back in the day, which getting out of a raider, like they'll just run out and delete God basically, which is pretty horrifying.
Okay. I do like the 2 5s with 2 Lords in there.
Yeah. I think nice. two 5s and a 10, I think was common at LGT. That was the first time we've seen that, and that's where Custodes being on the down is massive for CSM because they have good combat units. So suddenly you're like, oh, wow, I can just run more of this because I'm not going to hit an army that just fights first on me all the time.
Speaking of which, we can talk about the example list because
Hey,
this contains those things.
hey.
All right, so this is Leon's VSL from LGT. Obviously, it's one of the biggest super major recently. It's worth talking about, I think.
Look at it.
So we've got 3 Chosen Lords, undivided with Demon Hammers, 10 Cultist Nurgle, 2 Rhinos Nurgle, 2x5 Chosen Nurgle, undivided, 10 Chosen Undivided, 3 Forge Fiends, the Obliterators, 2 User 2, 1 Undivided, 1 Nurgle, 2 Warp Talons on Slanesh for the reroll or advance and charge strat, I think, right?
Mm-hmm.
3 Nurglings for objective stuff, Blue Scribes for Lone Op, and Celeste because it's a killer data sheet. Okay.
Yeah, so this is so good. Yeah, so with the Slanesh mark, it's worth saying, so for Warp Talons, it does give you advanced charge, which is great because you can have a big go turn, but it also gives you fall back as well, so they can fall back and do actions and those kinds of things as well, which is very nice if they get tied up.
And they get exploding 5s in combat, right? Or is that something else?
Yeah, I believe they do. Or Chris Rad was in the chat. Yes, he too was running this to great success at LGT. Well done, Chris, on your run. Good morning, Existence UK as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously this is going to be something that you're going to see a lot because it's a very high profile winning tournament list. So I think a lot of people are going to try and replicate this. Are there any other like variations on this you guys have seen, like more as Obliterators? Celeste is obviously kind of a rare model. Not many people have that one. Is there anything you see people take instead?
As a non-chaos player, what does what do the Blue Scribes and Celeste add to the list?
So the key things. Oh, sorry, Jack. If you know, you go.
Oh, Blue Scribes is a Lone Op.
Yeah, it's a Lone Op.
So it sits on a backfield objective and does Lone Op things, and I think it does mortals if you get close to it, something like that.
And Celeste is just a relatively small base, very punchy demon that can deep strike in. So it's all part of the kind of springing the traps surrounding the enemy, doing actions if need be for your homers or whatever else. But the key thing is she's got the old 2-up, get back up when you die. So you're not stopping her with Overwatch, and if you're a 1-phase army, you're in trouble if she gets in the wrong place because you can only shoot her, and then she's going to be smacking you with a hammer.
Also, very nasty range weapons. 2d6, strength 6, AP 1, damage 1, devastating wounds.
Yeah.
Torrent, so that's pretty nasty. And then just a bunch of strength 7, AP 2, damage 3 attacks.
Yeah. And Nurglings are 35 points now, so you can just fit Nurglings in any list if you want to just fit Nurglings. It's completely crazy how cheap Nurglings are.
Yeah, exactly.
What do we think? How does this feels like it's evolving a little bit, right? It's a bit less on the Obliterator side. Still got 3 Forge Fiends, like it still absolutely slaps, but definitely more MSU and more melee, right? I think that's the direction it's going.
Yeah, there's more objective play here, and there's more sort of I call it boots on the ground units, basically. Like chosen to go out there and be on an objective and like get stuck in, rather than just little units that are just like Warp Spiders equivalents. Not quite that. They just run in and take an objective when everything's dead and put like one guy on there and hold it.
Yeah.
So they're a bit more like that. But yeah, I think that's generally what we're gonna be looking at as a general thing.
Yeah, I think the only other build you're likely to see is the cultist heavy, so the accursed cultist, right? You can do the kind of tar pit type lists. I know Manny ran that to great success.
Yeah, with Abaddon for a 4-up invul
in the main event. Yeah, exactly. So Abaddon, I think a lot of people do still like Abaddon because he's a force multiplier and he keeps things like accursed makes them very durable. But I think those kinds of lists don't ask as many different questions. I think it tends to be, here's my thing, can you deal with it? Obviously, a lot of people can't, but if they can, it leaves you without a plan B. This thing that we're looking at here can play the game a lot of different ways. That's what's interesting.
I think that's like the appealing thing for me. Like, if I was to take on playing like CSM, like this has just got so many tools.
Yes, that's the thing.
It's like some people do like the stat check kind of style, but this absolutely just has the shooting. It has the combat. It's got a lot of utility. It's got a lot of units.
It's so quick.
And it can put the forward pressure on. It can play defensively. It's just like an all-round awesome list.
I think one of the key things about Chaos Space Marines is it doesn't have a very like obvious weakness. You know,
No, no.
it doesn't have hit them here and this will work well. I think
No.
that's part of the reason that they're strong. There's
Yeah.
nothing obvious to exploit.
Yeah, it's an army that controls the tempo. Again, obviously it's partly just index jealousy, but this is in many ways it's how Drakari used to play, where you will kill a lot of this across a game, but you're going to kill it exactly when they want you to kill it, after they've used it to hurt something and cripple you on the mission, cripple you on your scoring, and it can pick its engagement so well because it's so quick, because it can shoot out of line of sight, it can pick its angles, which means that you're going to have one of those games where you're killing stuff, but you always feel like you're killing stuff after it mattered, right, rather than before it mattered. And I think actually attacking CSM on the front foot early doors probably is important, because if you let them set the tempo, they're just going to have you in a headlock for the entire game, and just keep feeding you things and pushing you into a corner. But I haven't seen enough of how other armies play into it that do well to know for sure. Certainly the fact that Orcs have a decent win rate against them would suggest that pinning them in is important.
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely feels that way, doesn't it? Like, if this army is based around putting that forward pressure on and keep, like, with all of the stuff, scoring the points well, and then just smashing you in the face, how do you stop that? Well, you've got to try and stop those chosen getting into juicy targets.
Yeah.
You've got to stop those obliterators having something good when they drop down, and fortune. So that you can definitely see why the GSC and Orcs kind of thing. They kind of they're
Control
controlling
space, right?
space,
Yeah, yeah.
which is going to be like kind of the way forward, because otherwise, you're not in for a good time, really.
Yeah.
All right, so I think we've
What
pretty much covered
awesome,
CSM.
awesome and horrific list.
Yeah.
So let's move on to the next faction, which is Eldari.
Hey, everyone's
Have a
favorite.
wild bird.
So Eldari does have really good win rates against basically everything, which is what you would expect.
Yeah.
Imperial Knights, Tyranids, and Space Marines of all varieties are the obvious ones. The exception being Black Templars, which we'll get to
Ooh.
in a moment. The things they perform worst against is Grey Knights, Thousand Sons, and Black Templars. I put Sororitas down here because interesting stat about Sororitas. They have a 50% win rate against Eldari, but their average point difference. So the average difference in point score is 19 points in the favor of Sisters.
Right.
So what that means is that when Sisters win, it's a blowout. But when they lose, it's very small.
Yeah.
So
How many
it's
was
just
there a lot of games for that data? But that's a really interesting one. Sisters have historically been a bit of a pain for Eldar of all kinds.
yeah, I think it was about 18
Yeah.
games.
Oh wow. Okay.
So
Yeah, cool.
yeah, so overall win rate 56%, 9% play rate, very popular at the moment, and 5
Fair
of
and
them
balanced.
wins.
Sounds like it's fair and balanced. We're all good.
So yeah, I think interestingly here, the two armies, Grey Knights and Thousand Sons, lots of mortal wound output, which I think is really
It's the
important for
way you
dealing with
get
the Incarn.
through the Incarn and the Avatar.
Yeah, and what they both have is phenomenal movement as well. Ways to get into places that elves don't want them. Ways to no sell and avoid elf shooting, and mitigate elf shooting. Thousand Sons, yeah, they can deep strike, they can move again, they can play around Overwatch. They don't have to commit all their resources to clear out your chaff. Grey Knights again, 3-inch deep striking is a real pest. Templars is interesting though. How do we explain that?
I feel like it's just. I mean, Chris can probably answer this better than I can, but I feel like it's just having a horde of feel no pain bodies
It
is quite
must be,
difficult
right?
for Eldar to deal with.
Absolutely, like you think Eldar obviously got a lot of high quality and efficient shooting, but there's been a lot of talk about how Eldar realistically struggle into kind of like the hordes,
Yeah.
and like
Overload.
potentially like it's now the wraith. Obviously, now that the Wraith Knight has gone. So yeah, I could definitely see a situation where your opponent parks 20 Crusaders in the middle of the board and then another 20 somewhere else whilst just rushing you and covering that space, and you're like, I don't know, maybe eventually you will be able to clear them, but it will be too late.
Yeah.
Whereas you look at kind of like the obviously knights, they just die to the efficient shooting. I've
Yeah.
never really been. I've never really. I mean, I had a Wraith Knight, but I've never really felt threatened by the Space Marines. I've not played without the Wraith Knight into them. Nids is an
No.
interesting one because,
Yeah.
but I guess Nids are more into the middle ground stuff. Like if they ran full horde, that could definitely cause some issues depending on the Eldar build.
Yeah, I think Black Templars also have trapping, right? There's not been much trapping in the game, but Black Templars can give you no fallback type stuff, which obviously if some of those big bricks connect
Get
and
in,
cuddle,
yeah.
it's quite nice into an Incarn-oriented Eldar list, right? Because the Eldar list is thinking, well, stuff's going to die, and that's when I get the Incarn in. But if they're trapping you and then only killing stuff at the end of your turn, the Incarn's not going to be able to move and activate as effectively. Which frees up the Black Templars because you don't want to move an Incarn into a melee at the end of your turn, right? That's then you're going to get hit by a brick and it's going to die. So I think, yeah, I've not seen these games played, but I wonder if the trapping tech for Templars also helps. And also, they just have so many bodies that they can just win the primary without actually necessarily needing to
I mean,
get.
that's the big thing, is it? Because
Yeah.
the general rule of thumb is Eldar are going to beat you in the secondary game.
Yeah.
So can you out primary them? And you've got, these units like Grey Knights who can drop down 3 away and then go, here's OC 30 on a point. Good luck. And they also score secondaries pretty well.
Yeah.
So you can definitely see why. And Grey Knights aren't particularly great at killing things which are high toughness, but that's not what Eldar are. So
Yeah, I think in this new world of fixed objectives, Black Templars get a big boost there because it helps them catch the Eldari in the secondary game quite a lot.
Cleanse and whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just can't get rid of them. Yeah, I think that's pretty much covered all of those then. So, whoops, there we go. So, most wanted, Night Spinners.
Those are all perfectly fine units.
Night Spinners. Chris, you want to take these ones and talk about Night Spinners?
Yeah, go on.
All right, so Night Spinner is such an interesting one. When it first came out, it was like, it's devastating wounds, it's twin link, but I'm not sold, guys. Obviously, so it's D6 plus 3 blast, strength 7, 0 AP, 2 damage, devastating wounds, indirect. The actual shooting profile is like, yes, it's okay. However, that turns out that if you make a unit -2 to its movement, that's quite good. But if you make it so it can't advance either, that is unbelievably brutal into a world where a lot of people went, oh, I'm going to take these big bricks of hard to kill things. And when they're moving like 3 inches at a time, and Eldar love to focus on a part of the board and delete it and then move on to the next part of the board. And if you're able to make one part of the board move 3 inches at a time, it makes deleting the other part of the board a bit easier. It obviously, now that devastating wounds have gone, it's not got that spillover, but it still can just go into stuff. And you just roll hot and you can pick stuff up. And I think it's really telling that when the update happened, they went to 180 points, and Vic and Brian went, we're still going to take 3.
Yeah.
Because I was there with the running 2. I don't own 3, so it never crossed my mind. But I was like, 2? Do I need 2? That's a lot of points. And they just went, no, we're taking the 3. And there were so many times over the LGT where I was like, man, if these 3 units were moving 3 inches right now, this is not even a game. So yeah, I mean, they're so good. I think there's certainly going to be a point where, because everyone's obviously taking them, right? So they go up again at the next update. So I don't know, let's say they go up to 200 points. Like, you can't really spend 600 points on them, can you? Especially if some of the other assuming all the other Eldar stuff goes up as well. I still personally think 2's probably the sweet spot. But yeah, I can definitely see why you would be taking 3.
Yeah, I think 3 was probably partly like a mirror choice, right? Because if you outspinner your opponent in the Eldar mirror, then you're going to take away their little assets quicker, and you can remove their spinners and then kill their chaff. And so I wonder if that was a factor in it. But dear God, what an oppressive tank it is.
I mean, you're right. It got double nerfed, right? And people still took 3. In fact, they doubled downs and took more. So yeah, it does say a lot about
it. It just combos so well with the Incarn game, which we'll talk about in a moment. But if you've got 3 tanks that can kill anything on the board when you need to, that's quite useful.
Speaking of the Incarn, Chris, run
Yeah.
through the Incarn.
Yeah, so
Next up.
this is my favourite unit. Okay.
Yeah, mine
I
too.
played
I love
one
it.
game without it, and I was like, spent the whole time going, "Oh, if I did the Incarn could teleport, oh, I've got it." So I'm like, Incarn is now just always in my list. It went up in points to 350, and there's now genuinely like a discussion on is it an auto take. People generally are going Incarn and Wraithguard, or Avatar and Wraithguard, or Incarn and Avatar. And so it's kind of what works for you. I've played the Incarn for so long now. I just love the utility. So obviously, her thing is when any unit dies, she teleports to the last model, and then can act normally, which is a big departure from ninth, where it was you couldn't act normally, you couldn't charge, and that sort of thing. So you're always trying to teleport her in your opponent's turn. So she's got obviously the flamer, so she's able to pick up some little things there. In terms of resilience, T10, 12 wounds, halving damage, 4-up invuln, and a 2-up save. So in cover, kind of like a 1-up save. It's just the utility, and she causes just so many headaches. Now, in a perfect world, with you reminding your opponent constantly about the Incarn's teleportation, a lot of people can kind of mitigate her to an extent. In the real world, your opponent will forget, and that just immediately can just close down a game. But as the Eldar player with a lot of throwaway units, you can just put them in nuisance places, and your opponent's like, oh, right, well, if I kill them, the Incarn appears, but if I don't kill them, they're just scoring homers all the time.
Yeah.
And it's just that kind of that rock hard place kind of aspect. If you play her wrong, she does just die. And I think it's such an interesting discussion on terms of when do you commit the Incarn. Because, I mean, we were speaking about this earlier. If the Incarn's still alive, turn 4, turn 5, it's generally game. And when I've managed to get the Incarn into the backfield and like chop stuff up and just can't be dealt with, like you just win. Sometimes if you commit her early and your opponent spends all their time for one turn killing her, then that can still win you the game.
Yeah.
But conversely, it can also cost you the game because you now have lost this utility and your opponent feels a lot safer. So, and when we watched the LGT finals, all those players kept firing off the Incarn early and losing the Incarn, and sometimes they won and sometimes they lost. So it's actually there's no hard fast rule on when best to utilize her. She is really hard to play around,
Yeah.
because you can't. It used to be if she couldn't get within an inch of the model dying, she couldn't teleport to the place. Now it's just she gets to teleport, which is hilarious with things like infiltrators and that sort of thing, because she can just suddenly appear somewhere no one expected. But yeah, just a really, really cool piece, and it requires your opponent to be constantly on the top of their game with their like target prioritization and how they're planning out their moving and shooting and fight phase.
Yeah. I think key things for the Incarn are chip mortal wounds are massive, right? The Incarn can't heal. Dev wounds and mortal wounds go straight through.
Yeah.
So grenade strat, tank shock, things like this help enormously. Like if you do get an Incarn in your lines, you want to start doing mortal wounds to it immediately. So having anything with grenades covering you across your lines is very helpful, because once it starts taking damage, again, the way the opponent uses it changes a little bit. They're a bit more reluctant to just throw it away. And I think, committing a turn to dealing with it can be very worthwhile if it does pop up, and just getting rid of it, answering the question and moving on.
All right, awesome. Last one we got here is Weak Spiders.
Yeah, so they went up.
Chris.
They went up to 115, and still everyone's taking them. So I saw Moody Minis posted there saying couldn't believe they moved for 24. Basically, they move 12 inches, and then what they can do is something called a flicker jump, which means they move 24 inches instead. Now, there is a massive penalty to this. So, first of all, you can't charge with them.
Oh no.
Second of all, you roll the dice, and on a 1, you take 1 mortal wound.
For the Exarch.
For the Exarch. So basically they're moving 24 inches and doing an action. or they're moving 24 inches and flaming the shit out of something with 6d6 shots, auto hitting, strength 4, no AP, 1 damage, devastating wounds. And then on top of that, because of the way the rules are written, they can also fire and fade. So they do have a 36-inch move, which just basically gets you anywhere for anything that you want. So that's why you will always see at least one, quite often two, units in of these just because of their utility. It is 6 wounds, and it is 6 wounds, toughness 3, 3 up save. Obviously they die as soon as anything looks at them, but then the incarn appears. So it's what spiders are really good, and I would imagine they'll probably go up to like 130 in the next.
The Overwatch potential is massive as well. I was losing basically half of a Votan unit just trying to get near them.
Yeah, so
in the last game I played.
When I played demons, I went and stuck my water spiders right by his deployment zone, by some hounds. So they flamed in and killed like 4 out of 5 of these corn hounds, and then he moved the other unit, and then I overwatched them, and then they died, and then my water spiders died. Then the incarn appeared in his by his home
It's a
field.
good day, isn't it?
And it's like, I quite like this. This is all
Yeah,
right. It's just they offer so much, and as we've attested to many a time, fast moving infantry is the way forward.
Isn't
And
it
there
good?
are very few units which are more infantry based and fast based than water spiders.
Yeah, for sure.
I do find it quite entertaining that each one of these units we started with, well, it got nerfed, and I'm still taking as many of them as possible, and they're all
Yeah.
So Night Spinners went up 30, Incarn went up 80, I think, and Water Spiders went up 15.
And they're still a top tier competitive army, which gives you some sense of how skewed this was to begin with. Existence UK, you are right; they are not very interactive. Eldar in general doesn't tend to play a very interactive game. That's always kind of been part of how Craft Worlds play. They're that kind of trying to duck and weave and hit you
because they can't win.
Because they don't win. Yeah, you can put your Eldar army in the middle and say let's go, and your opponent will literally table it immediately. That's how these assets work if you actually commit them in sort of general combat. So that's the flip side to this. And if we compare it to that CSM list, the other flip side to this is that's every unit in that CSM list will kill most of the units in an Eldar list in one go. There are the exceptions being Wraithguard and the Incarn, right? So there's and the Avatar. So there's a handful of things in the Eldar list that can stick about. Everything else will just die when it's caught. So it does have weaknesses in that sense, and these things all get stronger the more space you give them to operate, which again takes us back to that kind of causing lots of problems and being very aggressive, generally working quite well.
Yep.
All right, let's crack on to the list then.
Oh.
So you've gone for Hugo Ricciardi's list from London GT is the highest placing Eldar player. There's so many units here that are so good that we just didn't cover that are in every Eldar list. We've got the Wayleaper with the Phoenix Gem, Farseer, Fugan, Solitaire, Spirit Seer, Fate's Messenger, who's going to go in the Wraithguard, the Incarn, 2 Night Spinners, 5 Sweeping Horse, 3 units of 5 Spiders, and 10 Wraithguard with a Wraith Cannon. This is, I say, probably quite close to something. I mean, normally you would see Shadow Spectres in here as well. But there's none here on this one. Solitaire also a bit of an out there pick for this list. But Wayleaper, Farseer, the Spirit Seer, and the Wraithguard, they're all really common picks as well. I mean, Chris, what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, so I really like this list. I kind of, at LGT, I ran a shit ton of characters, and it kind of enabled me to start to focus down on the things that I specifically think are the best. I really wanted a Phoenix Gem on my Wayleaper, because it just gives you so much utility on being throwing it forward. Oh, it's dead. Oh, it's back. Oh, the Incarn's here. And you can use it kind of like really aggressively. The Farseer is obviously for the -1 to wound on either the Wraithguard or the Incarn. Fugan, so I was going to say, I love Fugan right from the get-go.
You did? Your first Eldar game, you brought him.
Exactly. I'm always been about Fugan. It just was, but all these other units are cheaper. And so, but now that Eldar are a bit more fair and balanced with their points costs, people are taking Fugan, and having 2 units that die on a 2-up and get back up is so good. And his Melter with a Fate dice, he's doing 12 damage at 9-inch range. which is quite good at killing things.
Yeah.
The solitaire is an interesting one. I ran solitaire, and again, we were talking pre-show. He just doesn't consistently do his job. So his
No.
job is to go and score, assassinate, or kill a key character. When he dies, trigger the incarn, but he doesn't actually consistently do that, and so therefore, I've actually dropped him from my list. The Spirit Seer, as you say, is to go to the Wraith Guard and then turn one wound roll into a devastating wound for the Wraith Guard. The Incarn is the Incarn. I've spoken a lot about that. Two Night Spinners, which I do feel is the right point. Swooping Hawks. I love my Swooping Hawks. I've now got 2 units in my list. Just their utility. You can start them at the back of the board, pick them up, boom, turn 1. Kind of come down. The 3 Wart Spiders, because they're one of the best units, so why not? And then 10 Wraith Guard, who can be used really aggressively. And because Phantasm still works on them, they can kind of beat. And on UKTC, you can kind of Phantasm them, turn 1 up toward, if you go second, up towards the ruin, then move past or into the ruin, blap something, and then be like, well, if you shoot me back, I'm going to shoot you. And if that's maybe a bit too scary, they're just going to Phantasm to safety. And so it's a really hard unit to interact with. But it's
They're the
fine.
last heavy hitter, aren't they, that can benefit from Phantasm now?
Exactly. So yeah, it's a really cool list. I've kind of taken this as my structured list. The only changes I've personally made are I don't run the solitaire for the reasons I kind of said, and I've got a unit of Shadow Spectres in instead of
I still really like Shadow Spectres.
the second unit of Wart Spiders, and then I've got a unit of Rangers, just because I really like that safety blanket of just having
You
some
100%
sort of
want that. Yeah.
screening. So yeah, I've made a couple of tweaks to that, but other than that, I think that is really close to like kind of in my opinion, the optimal Eldar list.
Okay, so from the perspective of someone playing into Eldar, and like trying to counterplay it, I've got a few questions. So the Wayleaper Phoenix Gem, like when you kill that guy, does he get by the end of the phase or end of the turn? Or
Yeah, so it's end of phase. Same with Fugan, it's at the end of that particular phase on a tour.
so you want
Out of
units
engagement range.
of multi-phase damage is going to be the key then, there, right?
Absolutely, yeah. You've got to be careful with him. It's just like as long as you play him reasonably safely and put him on a certain side of the board, he's generally, because we've got like stuff like face dice and stuff. I mean, Fugan is obviously the one that is also harder to kill because Fugan's got a 2-up save with a 4-up invuln and has a 5-up feel no pain and 5 wounds rather than the 4. So Fugan can be surprisingly irritating to kill.
Oh yeah.
So another one is the Farseer. The power that the Farseer gets, that's the -1 to wound one, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so you can put that on the Incarn and then teleport it.
Yep.
Make it quite hard to kill, or put it on the Wraith Guard. So they're also pretty rough.
Yeah.
They're both
And
good
it's a
targets.
12-inch range. So, once the Incarn's off somewhere else, Incarn probably won't get it. And then it kind of goes to the Wraith Guard. And the Farseer's other ability is, again, within 12, flip a fate dice into a 6.
Yeah.
So when your opponent rolls their fate dice and they've only rolled 1 or 2 6s, quite often it's not the end of the world, simply because they're just going to be using those 1s and 2s up just to keep flipping them into 6s for your devastating wounds, or your 6 damage on a Wraith Guard, or your 6 damage on Fugan and that sort of thing.
And it's worth pointing that out with this list, because that's the thing with this, is that it is deceptively low on anti-tank, right? It's essentially got 10 cannon shots at a short range, Fugan, and the Wayleaper's gun. But the nature of how Eldar work with the Fate dice is that you can have 6s in a couple of places, which just means you only need 2 or 3 shots to take down a hard target every turn. And that's kind of how this functions. You can pop any hard target with those, and obviously the Incarnate itself can just blend through things with its sword. And the longer you let it do that, the better it is. So again, it's Eldar are again one of those armies where they can do a handful of absolutely amazing things every round. So it's essential that you don't let them have lots of rounds to do it, basically.
I think, Eldar are really good at tricking you into thinking, oh shit, if I move out, I'm fucked here.
Yeah.
Exactly. They're really good at that. And so often it's a case of you just need to go, well, I'm going to call your bluff and just kind of really put the pressure on them.
It
and
doesn't
not
feel good. It doesn't feel good, but it's often the right thing to do, which is force the issue in a bunch of places. they're just as scared of you as
Yeah.
you are of them.
Whenever my opponent goes, I don't really know. I guess I'll just move this unit out. But I'm like, yes, you've just let me. Eldar just want to sit there and score their points. Like, how are you going to
They
beat
love an
Eldar?
opponent who just goes, "Oh, I can't do this, I can't do
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
I
yeah.
can't do anything." And if you've mentally kind of collapsed, and I appreciate that the fact they've been overpowered for a while means that this is probably quite a reasonable way of feeling. But I think you have to come at it with a create a lot of problems and then find solutions in that chaos. I think you have to do it.
Generally, you've got to beat them on primary.
Yeah.
And
100%, because they're weak on primary, right? Nothing in this list other than the Wraithguard wants to stand on a point.
their OC is crap. Like the
Yeah.
Incarn 3, everything else in that list is OC 1.
Yeah,
Apart from
there is
finish.
very little mission play. They don't want to stand on points. The Wraithguard, if they get threatened, will leave the point that they're guarding. So you have to push them off the primary for as long as you possibly can, because as you say, Chris, they score secondary so well that the primary is the weak point.
And I think you're going to see a lot more fixed now. I mean, I'm just like, with my list, I'm just like, well, if I just take deploy and behind enemy lines, and because you've got something like Hawks that you drop down and then they fire and fade 14.
Yeah.
So
you can score it without ever risking Overwatch,
you're
right? That's
having to screen so much of the board because it's not like, oh, I've screened my deployment zone. No. You need to screen out 14 inches past your deployment zone. Because of the fire and fade aspect of things. So yeah, they're very going to be very good consistently at scoring.
This is where the Way Leaper was just the nail in the coffin for this index, right? Because it just has enough CP to do all of its tricks every turn.
Yep. Phantasm.
Other armies are making choices. This doesn't have to make choices from the get-go. It's not even like once I've chucked a card, I'll have enough CP to do it. It's like from the start, I can do all my tricks. And that's probably one of the big cock-ups in this index, was just giving them an extra CP on top of everything. Yeah. For sure. Yeah. But yeah, as you say, you can play that lovely primary secondary game with just throwing assets away without actually risking them. Drakari actually do this as well, but nobody cares because the rest of the book isn't good enough for it to matter.
I think we could probably sit here and talk about Ildar's tricks for another hour.
Okay, if you insist.
We need to talk about the trickiest army in the whole game.
Yeah, so we're going on to our next faction, which is Votan.
Oh, yeah.
So, Leagues of Votann. We've got overall win rate of 55%. It is shot up.
Oh, look at those CSM stats. That's sexy. I like that.
Their play rate is 3%, so it's the lowest of the ones we've looked at so far. And the one event win.
We're a rare people. Only idiots play them.
Right, so...
I'm the idiot. Yes, Moody Minis, it's Votan time.
Best performance they have against Necrons at 66%, Chaos Space Marines with 58%, and Tyranids with 55%.
Yeah.
So this isn't necessarily all these win percentages. This because I have performs best because it's not necessarily the best win percentage on each faction. Like if you may have like an 80% in like 4 games. So I didn't count those ones.
I think that's sensible. Yeah, we'll go where the data's best.
You know, it's like So these have the sort of most games and best performance into those games as well. Mm-hmm. So we got performs words against Eldari, surprising, Dark Angels, and Tau Empire. Interesting.
To be fair, I would take 45% chance against Eldari. That's the best chance I've had all edition. I think pretty much. Maybe a GSC was a bit better at one point. To comment on this, Necrons, the way Necrons have been built, they ask one question, right? Which is, can you kill my block with some debuffs on? And Votan put buffs on that cancel out the debuffs on the block, have a unit that ignores modifiers, and just delete it. So Necron's game plan falls apart. Chaos Space Marines is an interesting one. I'd have to play that more. I've found that really hard so far, but I haven't played like quite Sagittar heavy, and Votan can score very well and stay in the game. And it might be a bit like Orcs where it's too many activations. Do you think?
Yeah, it is like it's 45 games I think as well. So it's a good,
good decent
data.
Size. Good
sample size. It's one of the biggest ones. So yeah, I mean I say it is really interesting to see that. I think the Hearthguard unit, which we'll talk about in a moment, is a big part of this. But Dark Angels causing problems. How would that?
Paul beat me with Dark Angels in about a turn. When I was first learning Votan, when they were still rubbish before they got the buffs, I played Paul a couple of times, and Deathwing Knights get in your face at the start, and Votan just didn't have something that could kill that unit, right? Because the things that hurt Votan the most are damage reduction. The army depends heavily on damage 2. AP reduction. The army depends heavily on AP 1 and 2, and 2-up saves, because that combos with the above. So as soon as you're playing into an army that has those, my loss at LGT was to Black Templars with triple Redemptors. they do all those things, right? They've got Feel No Pain for damage reduction. They've got damage reduction anyway. They've got 2 up save. So as soon as you hit an army that has those things, it's like I think a CSM Terminator build would actually be much harder for Votan than the sort of MSU type builds. And so Dark Angels obviously have the best one of those in the game, the unit that has all that stuff, and they shove it up your face straight away.
Okay. And then Tau Empire is the last one. Have you played this matchup before?
Yeah, a couple of times. I played you, which was a loss, and I played
that
Carl
was-
Grundy, which was a loss.
That was pre-nerf though, to be fair.
Yeah, and also I was literally
Pre-buff.
my first. I think it was my first game or second game. But I think the thing with Tau is they are quicker, and they shoot just as hard, so they can outmaneuver you. You're committing things they don't have to. They can pick you off without losing, the crisis brick, and they have more cheap assets than you. Votan, although cheaper now, don't have like those little 30, 40 point rubbish things. So Tau can screen your space with like Kroot Hounds. They can throw, they've got a lot more little vehicles, little units to control the space with. So it's harder to control the terms of engagement. I played Carl Grundy at the Invitational, and that was very much how that went. It's like when I could hit him, I murdered him, but he was much more able to control when we hit each other than I was. Again, I think a more Sagittar heavy list that creates more problems is probably a bit better. But again, Tau are just going to kill Sagittars, aren't they? Let's face it. Right? every Tau unit kills a Sagittar.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Even the Kroot Hounds.
Sagittars are T10, right?
They are T10.
Yeah. So big spamming T10 is an issue for Tau. So I think the more
Yeah.
Sagittars that start appearing,
And that's a running theme with Votan, right?
Yeah. So speaking of which, let's go on to the Votan most wanted.
Here we go.
He says
Land forts, right? Oh, what?
Right. So first up, we have the Einhir Hearthguard. Do you want to go through these ones, Tom?
Yeah, look, this unit makes people lose their minds, unless they have a 2-up save, in which case they're generally fine. But what you've got is 10 baby Terminators, adorable baby Terminators, who fire an absolute ton of shots. 30 Vulcanite shots, which are strength 5, no AP, but dev wounds on the 6s. Then 10 D6 blast strength 4 shots on top of that. So if you're lining up a Necron brick, you are firing by the end of it like 100-ish. You're like a lot. It's a lot of shots, right? It is an awful amount. And the thing with this is that this combos with one of Votan's best stratagems, which is Ancestral Sentence, which is if you're firing at a judged unit, 6 is to hit a sustained 2. So if you're already firing 70, 80 shots, and then you're getting sustained 2 on those, and then you're doing mortals, and you've also got +1 to hit and wound, and Hearthguard hit on 3s. They're the best, most accurate unit in the Votan books. So they hit on 2s when they're judged. It will just annihilate anything that doesn't have a 2-up save. That's the killer thing. As soon as you're on 3-up saves, it doesn't really matter. It's going to put so many wounds on you that the target will go down. And you'll usually have a 10 with Grim Demeanor, which is the brick, so you're ignoring hit and wound modifiers, so you're getting your buffs. In some metas, it's ignoring AP and damage reduction as well, but obviously that depends on the meta. So yeah, this is a brick that will come down and into an awful lot of profiles. You could see why Tyranids was a bad matchup as well, right, for the Tyranids, because these can just look at like 3 bug units and just kill them all very happily.
Yeah. It's a stat check, right? Like you come down.
Oh yeah.
Can you take 100 odd strength 4 hits? If you can, then you are allowed to win this game. If you can't, then you're not going the corner.
And people hadn't seen this coming, right? People saw Necrons coming. People were calling Necrons to be very big at LGT, and this is one of the units out there that answers that question. And that's why Necrons simply didn't have the showing. People didn't take them, and they didn't have the showing that people thought they might have. And this was a big part of the reason, not the only reason, but a big part of the reason that this unit is out there. It's all, as you say, it's tough to kill too. People hate -1 to wound, right? And you can void armor. You've got AOC. So once a brick gets into combat, especially melee, because so many of the melee units in the game don't really have the AP, let's face it, they probably should have. They're coming in at AP2, AP3, and then you're reducing it, and they're -1 to wound. Stuff just bounces off them. I had a bunch of, I think it was Raven Guard, something or other with Shrike leading them, went into them yesterday, and they just didn't do anything and all died. And it was like, oh, nice. Good times.
Fair enough. I mean, T6 with -1 to wound is like a huge
It's a
proportion.
really, really good breakpoint, isn't it?
Huge proportion of the game is just going to hit you on wound you on 6s. Yeah, okay. So, I guess it's only if you're higher toughness, right? Higher strength.
It's only when you're higher, but then yeah, it just makes all sorts of profiles really difficult.
Yeah. Take us to Sagittar.
So Sagittar is just a bit of an all-star. It's got a scout move 6, it moves 12, it can advance, and the contents can disembark. It's tough, T10, 9 wounds, and basically it's got for a transport, because it is a transport, it's got good guns. It can either have 3 shots with missile launchers, 2 decent damage 3-1s, and 1 slightly less good D6 one, and a bolt cannon which does a few damage 2 shots. That's quite a lot of output, like a decent strength already. And again, you've got +1 to hit and wound in this army, so strength 12 weapons like the Sagittar has. I think this is the only place you can get the strength 12 that isn't like the Magna Rail, which is swinging as all hell, so we don't talk about the Magna Rail. The one I tried yesterday that I am now in love with is the High Las Beam Cannon, or as we affectionately call it, the Lottery Gun. This is a 2-shot las cannon with sustained D3. So if you're lucky, like I always am, you get D3 extra hits every time you fire this thing, and you're just chucking las cannon shots on at quite an alarming rate for a transport. It's really funny. I think the main thing with the Sagittar is that it lets you get into good spaces on the board. They are tiny, tiny, tiny units, so you can hide it in all these little crevices, all these little ruins. It can carry warriors, and the primary play on them is amazing because you can cover enormous ground, just chuck warriors on a point, take it back, or flip it, or go and do an action. You can fit, obviously, Berserks go in these as well. I've been trying that lately, and I think that's actually got more play than we'd necessarily initially thought as well. And they create this problem of there's all these adorable little moon buggies hidden in the rocks, and you've now got to come and get them out, or the Votan army is just going to start scoring loads of points. So because the army wants you to come and kill things, because then it gets judgment against you, this helps things like the Hearthguard get to work, because they're coming to fight you for the primary. They're killing the Sagittars, they're killing the warriors that spill out, they're getting tokens all over their army, and then your heavy hitters are coming in and a much better place to kill what they've committed.
Okay.
And you can be very aggressive with these as well. I mean, I haven't played like full Sem with them, but there's no reason you couldn't chuck like 6 Sagittars literally in someone's face turn 1 and say, here's the train, right?
Yeah, and you can run 6 because it's not gonna screw you on Bring It Down, because they're only
9 wounds. They're 9 wounds, yeah, exactly. So for Bring It Down, they're perfect. You could have, I've written a list where you have 5 of these in a land fort, and if they kill it all, they're getting 15 on Bring It Down. Like, I can live with that. Right, that's a tabling, and that's still very acceptable losses on the secondary point. Yeah, so they're a really good unit. They shoot hard. It just adds up is the thing. A real faff to deal with, and they can just hide in all the buildings because they're small enough to do it. They're one of those vehicles that gets wherever it wants to get.
How 5 dwarfs get in there, I'll never know.
They cling off the edges like little stubby Drakari.
Oh, right, okay. On the roll bars.
Mind
you. The last common unit we got here is the Hernkin Pioneers.
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. So they've got terrific movement. This is one of the more fragile units because it's got a 4-up save, which for Votan is just awful. They shoot hard because they ignore cover. They also ignore stealth with the upgrades that you take on them. So minuses to hit and cover aren't going to help. They put out a lot of damage to AP1 shooting, which again you can see that's the Votan special. Lots of AP1 damage too. That's what they love. And there's a little chain cannon on top. So, and they've got the grenade strat, so it's quite nice. You can run them up, punk something with grenade, do a bunch of shooting. I think the killer thing with the Pioneers for Votan is that they also have outflanking mag riders special rule. So if they're within 6 inches of the board edge, at the end of your opponent's turn, they can go off the board edge, come in somewhere else. And what this means is if you have 2 or 3 squads of these, mobility is an issue. I'm not going to although Votan can get into the middle quickly with the sags and the forts, those kinds of things, and they've got the deep strike. Once they're down, they really struggle to get anywhere else. But this gives you a constant ability to pop up and hit weak spots. It gets you in behind. It gets you can expose and kill enemy chaff. They're really good for picking off like Eldar units, right? If you need a unit to pop up and like fork 2 of the infantry so that you're going to kill one, and even if they get the other away. They're obnoxious and they're annoying, and they're 90 points. They're cheap. Really and they take some shooting to get rid of properly, right? Actually dunking a full squad of 3 because they've got the mixed profile on one of them, so one of them's 4 wounds. Takes effort. They're not, and they're T6. So, yeah, they just contribute to this overall game plan of quite speedy, obnoxious, quite tough stuff, quite hard to remove. That's the general vibe.
All right, awesome. Let's move on to the final list of today then. We've got Danny Porter's LGT list, going back to the LGT
Put
world.
mine in, Jay. Dick. That's fine.
He placed higher than you, so
It's almost like it was worse than this.
Yeah. So he's gone for Uthar,
Yeah.
Iron Champion with Axe, another one with a hammer, a Carve with a Gauntlet and the Vulcanite, 3 units of Hearthkin, Warriors with Iron Blasters,
Mhm.
and then all of the upgrades that they can get, Medpack, all that stuff. 2 units of 10 Hearthguard with Gauntlets, a hammer, and Vulcanites,
Yeah.
2 units of 3 Pioneers, and 6 Sagittar with the Beam Cannons.
Yeah,
Give us a rundown, Tom.
this is some proper buggy rush, right? This is going to come in at you very aggressively. It's got 6 sags full of little guys, so it's going to come and start scoring. Uthar and the Carl will be riding in 2 of those buggies, so you've got a couple that can punch a little bit harder. Uthar's actually quite good in combat, and he's really annoying to kill because he reduces all incoming damage to 1, which is just hilarious. If he goes and fights like an Avatar or an Incarn or something, it's just like no. So he's quite good, and he can spike some dev wounds, which you need. You need a little bit of mortal wound solution in here. Obviously, what this is going to do is rush out, start claiming all the points. As you try and deal with it, 2 big bricks of Hearthguard are going to drop on your head and cause enormous problems. And the Pioneers kind of can shore up the scoring and boot around the edges as well. This can screen quite well because you've got lots of little buggies to just control the space, hide around the edges, and screen out the sort of the sides as you push up. I think it's very good at rushing certain armies. I think his one loss was to Eldar, which makes sense because I think this can certainly have trouble if Eldar starts slowing it and popping Sagittars before you can get moving and all that stuff. But it's just really doubled down on speeding around and scoring and making trouble, which I think is where Votan are currently at. They're very good at primary denial. They're very good at secondary scoring in their own right. They're very good at pushing the primary by being in everywhere at once. This is an army that can be almost everywhere in the midboard and play the game. A lot of armies do that and they lose. Votan go everywhere at the start and can play the game, and that suits them. They take the entire midboard and make you come and fight for it. And obviously with the 2 Hearthguard bricks, it's just got this massive hammer option in the locker for when you commit your assets. So yeah, really, really good list. Danny's a brilliant player. And he kind of shows Votan players where to go next. He's good for that. Because no one rated Uthar. He runs it for one event. Everyone reads the data sheet again. You're like, oh, that's awesome.
So where do you hit the Votan then? If you're playing against them, where do you hit the Votan?
That is a very good question. Dev wounds absolutely massacres Votan. Any slowing effects is rubbish for Votan as well. You want to obviously demech them. And this is something me and Chris talked about. I think the killer thing with Votan is knowing where the Hearthguard are before committing properly to deal with them. You don't want a situation where Hearthguard bricks are dropping on your heavy hitters, and it should be relatively easy to stop them from doing that. They're 18-inch range, and they move 5. So if you control space in front of you, because actually the stuff on the board that isn't the Hearthguard isn't going to table you or cause you a huge problem in this list, right? It's going to chip away. It's got damage. It's going to plink with its many shots. But the Hearthguard are the hammer, so you need to control where they drop, control the space, and make sure that you then respond and pick those up and put a dent in. So anything, Dev Wound type units absolutely massacre them. Hearthguard die to Night Spinners, they die to Forge Fiends, they die to Obliterators. But I think they've also got a little bit of that. It's a bit Death Guardy where it's like you need to clear portions of the board and then play around what's left. Right, if you try and fight them everywhere, you'll lose because they're just that little bit tougher. But you do need to sort of clear space off. They're often quite weak in their own backfield as well because everything's kind of gone running forwards. So if you can take their backfield, that's big. Anything that can get in around the back, because they're going to dominate the middle, you know that. So you're sort of playing to protect your backfield, get theirs, maybe clear out one flank. That should be enough most of the time, would be my advice.
Are there any tricks that your opponents have to watch out for? Any
the main things are just knowing that a lot of their durability depends on decent toughness and -1 AP. That's what they're going to do. So you need either very high AP, AP4 does it, or you need to ignore cover with AP3. Those 2 things get through them. Anything else is very perilous, especially in combat. If you're going into Hearthguard with AP2, you're in trouble because they'll -1 AP you and you'll bounce a lot of the time. So high AP, ignore cover is massive. Dev wounds are massive. The tricks They have a 2 CP strat where they can shoot you back with a unit if you're judged. What I find in practice is that the 1 CP Votan strats are so good that you don't tend to have 2 CP for this very often. But it's nice to have, and it's certainly worth being aware of, right? Because you don't want one of your vehicles or something getting picked up in your opponent's turn for no reason. So be aware of that. I think those are the main tricks. And I think the key thing with the Hearthguard to remember is that rapid ingress is a very real thing, right? We quite like finding a pocket on the board, rapid ingressing a Hearthguard brick, and then pushing on to an objective with them in our turn. So you want to be looking at the board thinking, where on my opponent's side would he want to drop 10 Hearthguard, and how do I make sure something is cheap is there, pushing it out, so that if they were to drop, they'd have to drop somewhere I could see them, or somewhere too far away from the point to make it worth doing. If you can make it so that they're dropping in their turn and risking 9 charges, that's a much better place to be than letting them rapid ingress and walk onto a point, because once Hearthguard get on a point, they stay there for quite a while.
All right. I think that pretty much covers it then.
Yeah.
So
how great is it that Votan have made it to being on one of these? What time to be alive! My many years playing the faction, struggling away, finally getting what we deserve.
Tom apparently measures time in dog years. Okay, so yeah, thank you, Chris. Thank you, Tom, for joining me on this one. If there's any factions that you guys want to see for the next episode, leave them in a comment below.
Oh yeah, let us know. That'd be great.
Yeah, let us know the factions you really want to see. This did go on a bit longer than I thought it would, but we had lots to say, so I can't
it was
complain
super
about that.
fun. Well done, Jack.
Yeah,
That was
good,
awesome.
yeah.
It was super fun.
That was really good.
So yeah, drop us a message in here if you have any things you'd like to see Jack cover. Drop a message in our Discord. Obviously, we have a bunch of feedback channels and questions channels in there. So if you want anything covered on Matchup Plus Plus, drop Jack a message in there, and I'm sure he'll get to it.
All right, so that pretty much covers it. So I guess until next time, maybe a week or maybe 2 weeks, depends on how things go. But yeah, see you around.
Bye.